So declarations of interest in relation to the committee items. I think. Thank you, Peter, for that. Any other members? No, thank you. Confirmation of minutes from the Audit Committee meeting of the 20th of July, previously seconded. Thanks, Karen. Seconded. Diane, all in favour? Okay, carried. Any business arising from those minutes captured within our agenda. So we can go to the first report and welcome David from Bentley, so he's done the internal audit plan, so welcome today. And I don't know if anyone wants to introduce this item or we're going to hand over straight to David for the...
Through the chair, look, I'm happy to hand over to David. Obviously, Bentley's engaged to do the internal audit plan, which is presented to you tonight for information, so I'm more than happy for David to speak to it.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Now, further to when we met to gain consultation through a consultation process with the leadership team, members of the Audit Committee, and the aggregation of all of the data that we received in regards to your risk management artefacts, frameworks, risk registers, so on and so forth. We've undertaken a process of reviewing and, mostly desktop, but also through that consultation to identify projects that will address the risks and concerns of the committee, the leadership team, and obviously your documented risks that are in place. Hopefully that was spelt out within our report. I'm probably happy, Chair, if you're happy to take questions or go through the report by exception rather than the actual plan, and the plan we can talk to subsequently. Because the process we undertook with the plan is we put a proposed plan together. The management team have reviewed it quite critically and made sure that it works to the best of knowledge within the business and what the business activity is in the upcoming future. Considering the fact that audit plans need to have an element of agility to them anyway, in their timing and execution. But if there's any questions, I guess, of the committee in our approach and methodology, I'm happy to.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that, David. So open it up to the committee for questions. Karen.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, David. Yeah, I've got a few questions. I'm just looking at the plan, the proposed plan. I'm on page 16, 3-year rolling assurance program.
Yes.
On 15 of the attachments of the proposal, and you've got a lot of inclusion around teaching people about risk. And I know we did mention about risk at our last Audit Committee meeting, but I think there's a heavy reliance on understanding risk. And I appreciate we haven't got a risk appetite, and that's actually quite important, but I'm not sure that sits with an internal control program. I'm looking at the cyber security assessment, and I would have thought that we'd need to do that in year 1. I don't think we should be waiting until we have the implementation of a cloud environment. I don't think it matters. I think we should do that now and do that as soon as possible, because I think it is a key risk of many organisations, and we would be no different. I was keen to see more around classic internal controls, and I don't see a lot of that. Maybe I'm wrong. And the other point I'd make is around assessing strategic management plans and whether we need to really focus on that, and maybe a question to the CEO around where are the gaps there. Are there identified gaps? I think the project management audit is good. I'd like an in-camera session with the Audit Committee. I think that's essential. I'm sure that's probably there somewhere and I haven't seen it. Yeah, so they're my main comments. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Karen.
Yeah, so there's a few components that were within there, and I'll try and recall them. In regards to, apologies, the risk appetite, was it? Yeah, you don't have one. Yeah, no, it's something else, sorry. But in regards to the actual plan itself, and you mentioned the in-camera, so I'll work backwards. That's more about the actual execution of each project. So were you referring to an in-camera for the plan or for the actual rollout and develop and execution of the projects? Because that is not part of this remit, but it's certainly something that could be scoped into any audit that.
I would, as an audit committee member, I would like to have an in-camera session without staff here talking to you as the internal control auditor on any issues that you can mention to us without exactly the same as what the external auditors do.
Right.
I think it's a really good process to have that in-camera session as we get towards providing you, this is what your findings are. That type of in-camera discussion.
And so that'd be part of the rollout of any project that gets executed. So note, and if we're engaged, I can certainly take that on board.
So David, so on that point, and I think, so the first thing we've got to resolve in relation to the in-camera is, I notice this plan has got internal resources. So if we've got an internal auditor, it'll be that person that will come to the in-camera. If we're going to appoint Bentley's to do the internal auditing, then obviously your representative or yourself will be here. If it's a co-sourced arrangement, well, then we'll have to think about who will come in and talk. So it'll be the same time that we have the in-camera session with our external auditors that we'll say, look, this will be maybe 12 months after the plan has been implemented, and we can get some sort of a, in-camera discussion with those people there.
No.
Now, and if I can just maybe talk about the risk type of projects that's been put on here. Again, I'm of the view of the Mayor that I don't think us doing annual risk reviews is an internal audit. I would like to think that our risk function within the council is actually doing that role. But it's that person's role to review, update, make sure that the risk function is doing what these reviews are doing. And I think there's a lot of other areas, both from your interviews, from your reviews of documents. There are a lot of other reviews that I think that can slot into this 3-year rolling plan that would add more value than someone externally coming in and doing that. Maybe in year 4 or 5, when the risk person wants to have a review, but for that person to come and have an external person come and do a review, I don't think it's going to add value. So that's there. I agree. To me, there's nothing there around asset management. How well is asset management planning going? That is the big ticket item in every council.
If I can, Chair, March 2020 is when that's scheduled for, and that is a resource capacity issue as to the timing, I believe, and I'll let management talk to that, but asset management is certainly part of it. It's correct.
But again, if you look at that, to me, that's just one, that's talking just about city maintenance. I would like to do a review around how asset managements are prepared, developed, executed. Is it, how's it linked back to the long term? All of that, are those controls working effectively, not just around city maintenance? So again, it's a very narrow focus. And again, given if we're going to remove some plans, there's going to be a lot of spare capacity in ours now to build into these other reviews. So again, happy for other committee members to open. Yep.
With the strategic planning alignment, that actually includes looking at our asset management plans, about them being reviewed within 2 years of a general election, about how are we reviewing them? Are we reporting on them up? Are we doing what we said we were going to be doing? That is part of the strategic planning alignment.
Correct. And I agree. I've got no problems with that. But I'm talking about the actual asset management.
Yep.
Getting them reviewed. So if someone does a review, but the actual plan is not functioning properly, it means nothing to me. It says, okay, you're ticking a box, it's complied, you're reviewing it, but the actual asset management plan isn't effective for this council.
Yep.
And we know that there's going to be a lot of growth in this council, in this area, and I'll come back again, that is the big ticket item for me. And I think we need to have a very dedicated audit around asset management plans.
Yep, we can do that.
Peter?
Do you want me to talk about cyber security?
Yeah, through Chair. I agree with the comments that have been made by the Mayor and the Chair. Risk is an important factor. I saw risk as being the basis on which you choose the areas that you actually look at, as opposed to the risk management process itself, which I see as being done through a separate kind of process. Asset management, I agree, is important. I think I raised it the last time. My view is it is such a significant asset, or it's a significant issue for the council in terms of its decision making. The money consumed by it is enormous. That the council has got to have strong confidence in the fact that the figures are in fact representative and accurate, and that's for their decision making. So it's that kind of risk that I believe I'm sort of concentrating on. The process for building it up doesn't leave things out, and the accuracy of the information contained in there is reliable as it can be. There's a lot of judgment involved, I know, but they're the sort of things I would like to see in terms of the asset process. The other things I think I'd like to see, I think I raised it before, is when we're looking at, and I think there is a bit of that in here, but maybe not enough, looking at areas of functional areas about their control, the internal controls certainly, but in terms of the process and whether there's using external vision that has been around to other organisations, using the benefit of that to say, okay, well, there's an improvement you could make here. Might be an IT improvement, or it could be a general process improvement. Those sort of things I would like to see more built into the projects. That's I guess my comments as an overview.
Thanks.
Yep.
Can I just raise one thing about the cyber security? I know you're going to, and I'll note the reason why you're waiting for year 2 is because of the cloud, moving on to the cloud. But that still doesn't, to me, given the way our environment is now, that would be an audit that instead of doing the risk audit every year, I'd do a cyber security audit every year. So question again, when was the last time a cyber security audit was done of council?
Hello, thank you. We actually did a cyber security audit in July last year, which included penetration testing as well. So I'm not sure if that came through to the audit committee to be made aware of. But it was LGRS did it as part of their rollout program. So they went through our documents. They also did penetration testing. Some things we came up great. A couple they said one of the actions that came out of that was training to staff on cybersecurity, and since then they've actually been rolling out monthly training to staff, little videos with questionnaires. We actually came up fairly good, which is why they're in here. We said, well, we haven't actually changed anything since a year ago. We do have our firewalls and our vendors that we use that are constantly updating any new threats that come on board. But that's why IT were comfortable that we would wait until we've moved into the cloud, because then that will introduce a new set of threats.
Okay. So Nathan, can I then ask, so LGRS, did they use an external provider?
Yes, they did.
Who have got the IT skills to do it?
Yes.
Okay, and again, so maybe if that report was circulated to this committee, we might have said...
I think it was.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe can that be done out of session, a copy be sent to us? I think that's an important, again, it's about risk. That's a big risk of this council. Karen, sorry.
I think that also reflects that those sorts of reports need to come to the audit committee. It is a core activity or core role to look at audits, and this is the audit and risk committee, not just finance. So my view is, why didn't it come to the audit committee? Maybe it just wasn't thought of, and it's a learning process. However, I still maintain that we should be doing this type of activity every year. Cybersecurity changes that quickly. Threats change that quickly. My view would be that I think it's great that we're hearing that there was one done last year, but I think that every year is something we should just put in as that should be incorporated, and appreciate the information from Nathan.
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, Karen. So David, Diane, do you have, or Paul, sorry.
Yeah, page 11, I'm just looking at the key risks for a council. and there's probably a couple there. Most of my, I've got a good idea on. One is elected member conduct. The next one is lack of innovation and forward planning, and then business and commercial awareness and acumen. Can you just give a little description of what the risk involved in those, and then also what's the risk to us if we don't address those? Thank you.
I can certainly give my view on the world, but they were risks in your risk registers and risk systems. Yeah, so we undertook a desktop review in understanding what has been decided as a risk internally, dare I say, or for the council itself, and use that as part of the consideration in building the plan. So I haven't done, because we weren't actively part of the risk review process, I don't have that insight.
It just says based on our industry.
Oh, apologies, wrong, right, sorry.
Page 11.
Sorry, yep. So on that,
No, sorry, it's 9.
page 9.
Yeah, on your.
Page 11.
Of the pack?
11 of the pack, 9 of your report.
Thank you. Excellent. Yep, I'm with you now. Okay, so that is our experience. So in regards to elected member conduct, we've certainly had or been privy to experiences where elected members would go out and effectively contradict or circumvent the direction of the chamber as a whole, which has certainly been a risk issue, and it's unravelled a lot of decisions and a lot of decisions and directions of the chamber, causing media issue, reputational problems. No doubt you'd be well and truly across it, but we have seen it, and we do see that being raised as a regular risk on a regular basis. Not saying it's a risk that gets out of control, that's why the controls are in place, but it's certainly a risk that gets a lot of heavy consideration in the sector. Apologies for asking you to repeat yourself. What were the other two?
It was lack of innovation, forward planning, and business and commercial awareness.
Yeah, certainly. Okay, so lack of innovation is exactly that. The concept or the theory that councils get stuck in a rut. Obviously, a lot of that is angled towards digital and the enablement that digital causes. Obviously, you can service the community better. I've noticed a lot of councils have a really quality digital platform now, and that's improving quite regularly, and that's a big part of that. External engagement through innovation. Also, service reviews is the other component that typically comes in through this concept of innovation, to make sure that you're as lean and mean as you can, providing the quality service at the lowest cost possible. And business acumen being the other, that's at all levels of councils that we've seen that being raised, all the way from council themselves through to whoever's within the organisation, to make sure that they actually have an understanding that this is a business and it has business metrics. It's not just a government job or a government entity as such. It's really about running an efficient and effective business unit. So they're the risks that we're seeing out there.
Diane?
Mine's fairly minor, but if I can just make a comment on the report itself. If Appendix 4 and Appendix 5 were actually Appendix 1 and Appendix 2, it would have made it easier to read, for me to read the report, because I'm thinking, I really don't get this. I don't understand what all these codes are. And it wasn't until I got down further that they were actually listed there. That's just a minor point, but it would have helped me a lot.
Noted.
Please, Henry. So, David, are we going to? Again, Henry, from a CE's point of view, I mean, ultimately, as I've always said, to me, an internal function is a resource for the chief executive to better manage his risks, better understand the controls around Are you happy with the plan after hearing some of the comments from the committee members? Do you think we need to have a look at it again and re-present it at a future meeting, or are you happy to go with this plan as a CE?
Well, I'm certainly hearing from the committee that there are particular points of clarification and an emphasis that we need to reflect on. I'm not hearing that the committee are falling over themselves with confidence in terms of what's being delivered thus far. So I'm happy to take the feedback, have a chat to the team with our consultants and work through how we might refresh and then bring it back.
Yeah, that would be good.
I do think it is a reflection of our maturity in this space where I think this committee has predominantly functioned in a finance focus area, but we need to broaden that focus, which is what this journey sort of is about. We have Nathan who's has been focused very much in terms of work health safety, but we're broadening his scope and responsibility, and that's a reflection of being relatively sort of early on in that sort of maturity phase. So I think this conversation is very much a healthy one, but I think we need to come back to the committee with a sort of a refinement of the document.
Yep. Thank you, Henry. And look, one of the other areas, and I notice it's like one of the key priorities is around customer service. And I've seen other internal audits done around customer. I know it's not a traditional one, but it's amazing when you go to the people who've got the expertise in that area, because they realise that's why council exists. It's their customers and the community out there. It makes you change your practices and your process, and they come with some brilliant recommendations. People might think, yeah, we're going okay, we get a few complaints, but they'll tell you how to, and that's what an audit is about. So bringing in new controls, new processes. So maybe, customer service could be another potential audit. As I said, if we're going to take out the risk type of audits and replace them with other ones, there's one. And can we also maybe have in the plan somewhere if you've come up with a final, say, 3 or 4 for each year, can we have in one of the columns, when was the last time that particular area was audited? So for instance, cyber security, it'd be good to know it was done 12 months ago. If there's another one here that hasn't been done for 4 years, you'd say, well, maybe it is time. So that would be another good addition to the plan, if that's okay. Paul?
Just the other thing I want to talk about is the risk appetite. We haven't actually defined our level of risk, and I think that's something we need to do.
Correct, but that's not the internal auditor's role.
No, but it's in the plan.
No, it's not in the plan. It's an improvement opportunity.
Oh, okay.
So again, it comes back to this committee and back to council and management to put something forward to this committee that we will review, endorse and send it to council, who ultimately has to approve that risk appetite level. So that Henry can go away with his team and his staff to run the business based on the risk appetite.
Yeah, right. It's an improvement. Okay. Can I comment on it? No,
that's okay.
Oh, sorry. I thought you said no. No. In my opinion, I think we're too risk adverse. That's my opinion, and I think we have too many layers. So I'd just like to, for our council to decide on the levels that we need, because I think sometimes that constrains what we do and probably costs us more money. So that's what I'm concerned about as well.
Yeah.
If I can, that's where a risk appetite is really useful, because if council sets its risk at what level it's happy to accept risk, then that reflects on the risk register, and the two need to be aligned. So David's nodding his head, but it really is quite helpful. And the further apart you get from each, the worse it is. So they do need to be, but it helps you understand. So different councils or different boards might have different risk appetites, and so if you're risk averse, well, your appetite for risk is going to be quite low, isn't it? Whereas if you're ambitious and don't care about risk, then it might be quite high. It depends on, but it's a really good conversation to have, and I think this committee could be quite useful in helping to shape that. Sure. Maybe. Yeah.
But what I think, on my view, is that when you haven't got one, by default, it's right at the far end. It's really risk adverse by default. And then I think you need to sort of come to the middle ground somewhere.
That's right.
Yeah.
Mind you, Paul, you'd rather it be that way, because if you look at the opposite, where banks didn't have it and they let their executive teams go berserk.
Oh, yeah.
We've seen what the end result of that is.
Yeah.
Commissions and
that's fine. I know, but I mean, as a default, that's fine. But I think we need to work on that.
Yeah, no, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Nathan,
So it's definitely on the executive's radar. They've already said we want to look into this. We're doing step by step. So the first thing we've done is we've migrated our strategic and operational risk into SkyTrust, which is similar to Control Track.
Yep.
For monitoring, control assessment, and we start progressing it that way. I've talked to Addie and Colleen that helped us develop our strategic operation risk to ask them, can they do it? And they said, we've been doing it for a few councils. But I asked them what sort of timeline, and they're 4 to 5 months to create one. And there's quite a lot of robust discussions happening because different people will have a different risk appetite for depending on their own personal experience. And I know that Bentley's actually helped Playford Council create their risk appetat. So how long did that sort of take? Just to give, it's not a 5-minute tick and flick, it's a comprehensive review.
That process was a large process, but that was in conjunction with reworking their entire risk framework as well. So it was part of a larger piece. The entire engagement was about hands-on or on the ground. It was about, give or take, 2 months of elapsed time. And then there was a training and implementation process that followed. So full end-to-end was about 4 to 5 months, but the intensive was for a few months of help.
And Nathan, if I can say, it was a good point. You said that, councils will come in here and maybe bring their own risk appetite, but that's not what they're here to do. When they come into this chamber, they've got the council hat on. They leave their personal hats at the door and they come in and they've got to look at it from what they've been elected to do is to manage the community and the council. So hopefully when whoever's going to do this exercise with them is just state that right up front. You are here for council, not your own personal. Karen?
If I can, because it's a really interesting area. Once a council sets a risk appetite, it flows through. It's so much easier to manage your risk management plan when you've got a risk appetite. When you haven't got one, Paul's right. It's risk averse generally. And that might be where council sits, but we don't know that yet. And once they make a decision, that's a decision. And so, and even after they've made that decision, it's still an evolving process because then they'll be challenged and their risk appetite might mature over time. So it needs to change to the feeling around the table collectively. But it is a decision of council that would come up. Council would tick off on whatever that appetite is. And once that's set, it guides the organisation quite effectively. And it does challenge the board or council when they make decisions, you go, actually, that doesn't fit with the appetite, and yeah.
Council's risk appetites, they would have changed because all of a sudden financials have changed, so all of a sudden their risk appetite financial has now changed. So it does, it's very important.
Yep, okay.
Just to help guide us, because doing an audit is fantastic, but then you have actions. There's no point doing an audit if we don't do any of the actions. Yep. And that's where our project management framework, we've been working on that for a year. That was one action from one audit and the amount of work. So I suppose as a bit of a guidance, in this current plan, we said, when I looked at this, the review workshops, I didn't classify that as an audit. I thought that was just a bit of a review to look at us, look at what actions we said we'll do and make sure that we're tracking on them. At the moment, we've got 3 to 4 audits a year occurring, and that's something that we said we think we could manage for myself, but also the leadership team and the executive team, because they're all involved in these audits, but also implementing actions that come out of these audits. How many audits do the committee think that we should be trying to achieve a year?
Thank you, Nathan. It's not about how many, it's actually about making sure that we're best practice. So if there's a resource issue, this audit committee needs to know about it. And certainly in recent times, we have recommended to council to invest in internal control. That's one example of investing in getting all these processes right. So I don't think council's averse to not providing the resource if they're required. So it really depends on what the gaps are and where we need to fill those gaps. So it's not about how many audits, it's about what the state of play is. And we won't know that until we get this back. till we get our internal audits back. Does that make sense?
David?
May I suggest that stapled directly with your risk appetite? So if you are in a low risk appetite, then everything's important. If you are prepared to take risk at a certain layer, then there is a tolerance to delay what would seemingly be pressing issues, if I can put it that way. So your risk appetite is going to be a massive driver as to how urgent it is to get an audit done over a business area or process. So I just want to bring the fact that they are connected.
We can't answer any of those questions until we have the information. We haven't even started the internal audit yet, so we don't know. We don't even know yet what information we're going to get back. And then we make decisions on that. Then we go, okay, right. I agree that risk appetite is connected, but we haven't even done an internal audit yet. We haven't even started.
So I think if I can just summarise this, I think if you start with the plan by having, again, I think we spoke about the 3 areas. You have one strategic internal audit a year, one operational, one compliance audit. And I think from what I can see, the ones that we've taken out, the remaining, will actually fill into that, plus some new ones. So something like customer service is very much a strategic audit. I wouldn't call that, it's not about being compliant. You want to know what do you need to do to improve your internal systems and processes to give good customer service. That's strategic. That's going to have great impacts out there, which is the community. So if you have it in those, and again, Nathan, I think having that last one, which is the post review, I think having that as a 15 hours every year as part of your annual plan, no problems with that. So that I think you're saying is we've done some audits. Now let's check and see there's been recommendations. How well are those recommendations? No problems with that. I think that's a good initiative to have in there. So if you maybe build it on that case, do the 3 years strategic, operational compliance plus that review, bring it back. But again, as I said, mainly, speak to now. Can I also just raise one of the other things that was spoken earlier in the plan, which is around the objectives and scope, which is page 8 of 37. And I know we said that this plan is going to be flexible enough to allow the inclusion of ad hoc reviews that may be requested by the council. Well, it's actually the council, the chief executive and the audit committee. I think we need to have all 3 in there. And I think council will be relying more upon the CE and this audit committee for saying, hang on, something is now transpired, whatever it is. We're saying we've got this plan, that goes out, we've got to put a plan, this review has to be done starting tomorrow. So that, I think if we can include council, chief executive and audit committee will be great.
Chair, the intent there was council as the organisation-wide, enterprise-wide, not specifically the elected member body. That was the intent, but happy to articulate that separately.
That'll be good. Okay, any further questions on this? Because I think Henry's indicated he's happy for it to go back and some further review done. So we note the internal audit work plan update report, and we'll note that we've provided some feedback for it to be incorporated into the plan, and that obviously we can't do, number 3 can't happen. So 2 and 3 won't happen. So Karen, you're happy to move that? Seconded? Thanks, Paul. All in favour? Okay, carried. And thank you, David, tonight. Okay, 6.2, the risk management action plan update. Paul? Yep.
Thank you. Through the chair, this is just a sort of brief update report for the committee in the risk management space. We've touched on in the report, there have been a number of factors that have sort of delayed progress in a number of areas, particularly obviously with the sort of COVID-19 impact, but nonetheless we're endeavouring to progress things as best we can. We have noted in the report that Ryan Viney is Manager of Development, Environment and Regulatory Services, is here to be able to
make a presentation relative to risk for his division, similar to flowing on from the presentation that Sam Delana made earlier this year. So we're rolling out that program, and I guess invite Ryan if he wants to make his presentation.
Well, thank you very much. My name's Ryan Viney. I'm the Manager of Development, Environment and Regulatory Services, and been asked to give a presentation on our operational risk. Just sort this out. So just to give you a bit of an overview of my team and my division, I have three areas in my division. Development services team that looks after development approvals, planning, building and building compliance, building fire safety, swimming pool inspections, liquor licensing, Section 7 street numbering. So it's fair to say that my division is very heavily driven by legislation and regulatory type services. My other team that I've got in that division is the Environment Services team. We're looking after public health inspections, supported care residential facility licensing, environmental management, resource management, climate change, adaptation and mitigation, and a raft of other sort of initiatives, birds of abundance, pest control, and so on. I also have a strategic policy development, and this team looks after our community plan, monitors the delivery and implementation of that along with the CEO, the corporate plan, development plan and policy amendments relating to land use planning, infrastructure investigations, and heritage protection and placemaking. Community safety team is another team that's in my area. Obviously, these guys look after council permits, parking inspections, unsightly premises, illegal dumping, fire permits, so a whole raft of legislation that is applicable for authorised officers under the local government to implement. I've got three team leaders for each of those categories: David Belatovich, Louise Dabrowski, and Jack Bazanos, and then a personal assistant. And there are 24 staff within my full-time staff within my division. Just in terms of some fast facts to set the scene, we do about between 600 and 800 applications. Development applications each year, about $50 million worth of development. We do 720 property searches and 40 cap reports in terms of development applications. The community safety team, we've got about 6,000 cats and dogs registered. We deal with about 60 odd barking complaints during the year. Pick up dogs, 281. We have dog attacks, about 22 dog attacks. 8 sort of more serious ones on average in terms of the dog attacks against humans. So there's parking infringements, APA berming permits, and fire prevention notices. So give you a bit of a snapshot of the types of and breadths of stuff the community services team does. Environmental services, so this is environmental health, public, has immunisation services. We provide community clinics and school clinics. We do about 1,000 to 1,500 in each of those categories. We've been heavily involved with obviously the COVID response out in the community, educating the community about those changes and monitoring. So we've had a significant increase over the last 6 months in terms of this space, also picking up food auditings and the usual stuff that these guys do. In terms of risk, I've identified a couple that I wanted to talk about today. I'll start off with the development services team. So the risk that we've identified is incorrect development assessment processing of development applications in particular, where obviously consequences is reputational in the community. It's illegal challenges through the ERD court, Supreme Court, judicial reviews, and obviously financial impacts associated with those types of legal challenges. In terms of some of the controls that we've got in place, we have the Council Development Assessment Panel, which assesses the complex development applications. We have delegations that are aligned with staff with different experiences, so there's a scaling system there. We've developed standard operating procedures. We have assessment checklists, and I'll show you some of those later in the presentation for each category of types of development. We obviously appoint qualified staff. We have degrees that are required in planning. There's an accreditation scheme that members, both council and independent members, need to be appointed to. We have training and needs analysis undertaken as part of regular performance development reviews, which helps us to keep up to speed with changes legislation and contemporary practice. We have a file allocation process which is managed by the team leader. This allocation allows staff, the team leader, to manage workloads and difficult files and assign them to appropriate staff to make sure that the appropriate people are dealing with appropriate matters. We have a peer review processing relative to public notification categories, which is a key legislative requirement under the Act, as well as CAP reports. Standard templates and conditions that are applied to our development approvals, which have been reviewed. So there are some of the controls that we put in place relative to development assessment. And we note that we had an audit done in 2018 from LGRS of these controls, and we came back really positive. We didn't have any non-compliances relative to that audit that was taking place.
Well, can I just ask a question? So just on that one risk.
Yep.
What is your inherent risk level, and after all those controls, what's your residual risk level based on the council mechanisms?
Yeah, look, it's low, so it doesn't meet any, it doesn't reach into anything of a strategic level, but it's relative. Once we put these places in controls, it's relatively, it's a low risk.
That's up.
Yeah.
What would it be if you didn't have all of those things in place? This is again the important part about why we need to ensure that all these things are in place. So you could have a assessment panel with all of a sudden people leave, you get some wrong people on there. Yeah. That could just create, as you said, reputational risk that will be legal, that will be.
Yeah. So look, obviously it is a significantly high risk development, and we'll get into some of the I suppose the risks that are assigned to public health and safety in the next slides. But if you get an application wrong, it's there are obviously significant consequences in terms of financial. So it's really important. Obviously, it is a heavily legislated process, so it's really important that we've got those check sheets to make sure that we are adhering to the legislation.
Well, and again, I would assume somewhere in those controls, conflict of interest would be a very big thing in your area.
No, it is, particularly in relation to development assessment matters. Maintaining that.
Again, this is the thing I was going to say. So I want to see that maybe one of your key controls. So do you manage your conflicts of interest? That is a key control. Without if that breaks down, the community is going to find out, and they're going to say, well, these applications get through because so is on the panel. So what I'm saying, that's to me is why. But see, to me, that's not on there. I'm thinking, hang on. So they obviously got all these great things like conflict of interest is managed. These are controls. So I think it needs to be.
That's a good point. Obviously, it's a standing item on the agenda relative to CAP meetings. There is legislative processes relative to the appointment of independent CAP members, needing to have ordinary returns done and declaring their interests. Obviously, the assessment manager has to do the same process as well. So I suppose I didn't put them up there, but there are some controls in place that deal with those conflicts of interest.
And the reason I say that is I know that if someone does want to come look that when we do have our risk reports made available, because that's all public information, I think that's the area we get in conference to say, all the council does it well, they manage their conference in this key area.
Yeah.
So, just quick thought again about building all the information that you need to build.
Another key area in this, sorry, I skipped. Another key area in the development services is in relation to failure to undertake our mandatory inspections and compliances. Again, reputational, legal. This time there is a consequence relative to public health and safety, and obviously financial. So the types of things that I'm referring to here is our legislative requirements to inspect 100% of pools, to inspect framing layouts, 66% of owner builders, licensed builders, and 90% of owner builders. We need to do those inspections. So we have a authority workflow manager which manages our notifications when they come in. It provides a platform for our reporting and recording of that information. We've got a register of pool approvals that we manage each year, and make sure that we're doing inspections to get that 100% approval rate. We have on-site checklists have been developed. Obviously in this area as well, staff need to be accredited and qualified, and there are certain levels. We do training and needs analysis. Like I said, delegations as well are a big important way of managing how different workloads and different files are otherwise allocated to different staff. Yeah, so again, there's a lot of, I suppose, repetition between each areas relative to how we manage it. It's heavily reliant on check sheets which staff take out in the field and manage and report against.
So Ryan, again, just on that point, and taking up David Pappas' comment about innovation and they're using systems.
Yep.
I would think that your area of all should have some of the best systems. So for instance, I'll just take the register report. So is that on a database? Is it on a spreadsheet, or is it? So how does it then prompt and trigger and flag that this pool needs to be inspected tomorrow or next week?
Yeah. So there's a So once it comes into council, there's a requirement for, particularly in relation to inspections, building inspections. There's a requirement which is linked to notifications. So we need to inspect 90% of owner builders on notification. So once the notification comes in, it triggers a workflow and a requirement, and then we monitor in that. The pool register is a little bit more manual orientated in the fact that we only have, on average, to 20 pools a year. So it's not a big scale of development, but we monitor that, through that process of the online spreadsheets.
Got at that point, Mr. Chair, the planning team, through Brian's leadership,
is such that we've got a young team, and they're very enthusiastic, and they've really transformed that business in terms of using technology. Where is it now? 2 or 3 years? It's been a completely paperless environment. And if we have a department that's an exemplar in terms of using technology to improve systems and processes and having checks and balances, I think this, planning and development area is certainly one of them. So, yeah.
Yeah.
While we're on development services, because I think you're going to environment next, and maybe this is covered somewhere else, but I'll just raise it here. So do you guys get involved with development, residential developments where developers are building streets and drainage and all this sort of stuff? How do you deal with those? For example, if they're putting down a road, how do you get involved in checking to make sure that the road is being built to certain specifications?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to me, it's a big risk that you might inherit assets which are inferior quality.
Are you reading our agendas on screen?
No, I've had experience at Mawson Lakes. So
Yeah,
it could be
yeah.
very costly in the end for a council. It may not appear in the next 2 weeks, but 15 years down the track, it's can be significant. So I'm interested in how you control that area of things. If that's
Yeah, no, I suppose there's a little bit of a crossover between myself and the engineering department, in the fact that we undertake the assessment of applications which design the roads, and we oversee the technical specifications and the design and the civil engineering, and approve them to our standards. We have set standards for land divisions which sets out the type of infrastructure and the quality of infrastructure that developers who are building roads need to comply with our standards. So our assessment is against our standards that we create. And then, so that's the first part. And the second part is then we go out on site to make sure that what was delivered is consistent with what was approved relative to that. And then I suppose once we're comfortable, we have a check sheet. There's a whole raft of other procedural type elements, because sometimes a developer may not want to deliver all the infrastructure at once. They may want to give us a bond so that they can clear land and process and continue to do it. So we also need to make sure that the bond that they're giving us is adequate to deliver the infrastructure if we need to. So there's a whole raft of checks and balances as well in that. I can give you another session just on that. On those types of checks and balances, because that is a significant risk. And we recently went through a process where SCAP was the assessment agency for Springwood, and in that process we did lose some control over the design approval process, which we fought to try and get back, and we've been quite successful to get us back at the table to make sure that the assets that are being designed are to our standards and that we are signing off on that. So, obviously Springwood is a major development. It's going to last for, or be developed over the next 20 years. There's 30 kilometres of road. There's, 80 hectares of open space that will all come over to council as an asset. So we need to make sure that whatever assets coming over is we're happy with. It's been designed that's, to be easier for us to maintain. So all of those types of things. And I suppose that there are three interfaces within our organisation that we need to manage: the planning, development, assessment, the construction handover to our assets, and then the depot staff who are then responsible for maintenance and delivering on an ongoing basis. So we need to make sure that we're aware of what's being approved when it's coming onto our books. There are adequate resources in place to make sure that we're dealing with that. And I think that's a significant challenge for a growth council, is managing that growth and that incremental growth, and how do you continue to resource it and manage it on an ongoing basis. And yeah. Yeah. So I'm moving on to the environmental services. So I just focus here on, failure to undertake food inspections, public health inspections. There are a raft of legislative requirements under different acts that our health officers are responsible for. Again, there's similar sorts of consequences. Probably the greater focus here is in public health and safety. But in terms of the controls that we manage, I'll focus in here, I suppose, specifically around food premises and food businesses as an example. But we have a health manager software which helps to manage our workflow. We essentially provide some data into that health manager software, which then provides us with an inspection regime, which is very much based on a risk-based approach to inspections. So, you know, obviously, as an example, you might have a food business or a business that provides food to childcare or elderly centre. So they have a higher risk rating, so they get a more frequently inspected. Officers obviously have check sheets and standard operating procedures, so when they're out on site, they know what they're there to do. It's recorded. Again, as heavily qualified staff in this area, you need to have certain degrees to undertake certain activities. Delegations reflect those, and we provide a regular training as things emerge. Community safety. Again, I didn't want to necessarily pick out any specific risk, but failure to meet our legislative requirements, whether that be under the Local Government Act for inspecting a noise complaint, or a dog attack under the Animal Management Plan, environmental protection type, environmental nuisance, so Parking Act and traffic management as well. Making sure that we're adhering to those legislative requirements. Again, it's quite, in terms of our controls, it's very similar to the other areas. We obviously have authority in this instance, which manages our workflow, our notifications and report writing, check sheets. We're starting to enter into Sky Trust, regular inspection times and contract expiries, again, qualified staff, and some of the things that I've been talking about, which is that regular training, education of staff to make sure that they're aware of any change in legislation or any contemporary practice. Emerging risk. I think there are two areas for our emerging risk, and I think they both focus around legislative reform. We've obviously had the Development Act in place for 20 years now, and we've been able over those years to develop pretty robust systems, checklists, procedures, and we've got it pretty sorted. We're about to go through a new Planning Act. There are a whole raft of new requirements, basically the old ones going out, the new ones coming in. We need to start from scratch, and we need to, and we've established to help manage that transition, which is staggered, but to help try and manage that transition, we've obviously established an internal policy transition working group, which is looking at how we manage as best we can a like-for-like translation and policy for managing development in our area under the new code. We've established a business readiness transition working group, which is looking very much about our systems and processes, our IT capability, our delegations, our staff training. So it's a whole up, top to bottom approach at looking at our systems to make sure that we've got the right resources in the right place, because there are some new requirements, like, for instance, we need to, install the signs for public notification on properties. There's a lot more heavily focused on verifying developments within 5 days, because if you don't get that right, it puts you on the back step. So this is an emerging risk, and I suppose one of the things that keeps me up at night. So these are the things that we're trying to work through at the moment. A new CAP appointments, new delegations, and basically redesigning our systems. So I just did a screenshot of, just for instance, all the checklists that we've got. This is just the building area, and this is just, some of them. So every class of building that we get faced with, we've got a checklist, so we know what we need to check it against. So class A, pools, so it's quite a regimented checklist, and we're quite thorough in this area. And then we've obviously got a whole raft of policies as well and procedures that we've developed over time. Section 7 statements. It's quite an important one because a lot of members of the community refer to that when they're purchasing new properties. So having the information updated and regular and a double checking of that information is important in terms of that. I think it'd be quite clear in terms of our organisation, we're probably the most regimented in terms of check sheets and processes. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ron. It was great presentation. And look, just with that emerging risk, if I ask that question again, so what would be the residual risk level at the moment for that? And if it's high, I think that would be quite normal. And coming back to the risk appetite conversation, you just say at that point in time it is, but obviously the manager's saying, I've got high residual risk, but I need to bring it back to maybe a moderate or low. It doesn't always have to be low, which comes back to your point, Paul. If you're risk averse, then you're putting so much on the manager to just keep driving and control. Maybe you don't need that. For certain things, there are numerous areas within this one area of management for Ryan's area, but he might have some. So you can run that at a high level of risk because we know that's just the nature of the activity, because you keep throwing controls, and remember, every control you throw at it, it's going to cost the council more money. So it's getting that balance right. And again, as you said, is what keeps you up at night, but he needs to have the level of controls that he can sleep well at night as well. So important. So thank you, Ryan. That's a great presentation. Thank you. Any further questions from? No? That's great. So we've got a recommendation that we receive a note, the Risk Management Action Plan Update Report, and also the presentation from Ryan. Diane's moving. Secondly, Karen, all in favour? Carried, thank you. Okay, Business Improvement Update. You getting that, Paul? Tara?
Through the chair, unfortunately, Tara Shillabeer would have been here to present the report, but she's fallen ill today, so gives her apologies. However, I have spoken to her today about her report, and again, it's very much an update report for the committee, noting, as she has in some of the tables from page 10 onwards, for example, just giving indicative updates with timelines with various elements that she's working through. And I think the other point of reflection to on page 13, she's just referencing that with one of the recent staff resignations, her role has sort of expanded as a result. In terms of assisting with the sort of project management framework that we've been implementing through the journey, and again, information report, but more than happy to answer any questions members may have.
Yep.
Just a comment, I think it was a really, really good report. I liked the, there's a note around key outcomes to be sought, and I think that's a really good explanatory note of where we're taking these efficiency measures. A lot of work gone into this process so far. Just a question around, I'm on page 12, and in the report it says an aspirational savings target, so it's halfway down the page, just above project management framework heading, so on page 12. Says in the order of 5% has been established, and but there's a disclaimer talking about local supplier participation. So has there been any update on whether that 5% is threatened?
Through the chair, Mayor, at this stage, I think it's too early to make a call in that space. We're really just flagging it from the perspective that
with the focus now being heavily towards local supply, local employment engagement, we just need to be mindful that there may be potential financial impacts in that space, but it's too early to make a judgment call in that space.
So just a subsequent, if I may, Chair. So the recent experience with the caravan park is front of centre, where the estimate was one amount and it was double, over 200,000, which is a huge change. And I guess that comes to mind. And certainly just trying to understand that process, just perhaps some thoughts around how we minimise that happening again, or whether it was a one-off. But I always think if it's happened once, it could potentially happen again. So what's been the discussion around minimising that risk? Because that was very much around local supplier participation, wasn't it, I think?
Through the chair, look, that was certainly part of the focus. But I think, as Sam Delena mentioned, I think the last council meeting, that I was certainly of the view there had been a high level of rigour placed on that process, and both the tenders that had come in were of a similar value, but with discussions I've had with Sam on it, there was certainly, I don't think there were any sort of material gaps in that process, but nonetheless, I think there's certainly learnings that can be gained from it, which we'll take on board with future tenders as we roll them out.
Yep.
Just to add to that, the team's currently working on the report to council on the COVID response and the criteria that we're seeking to apply to the various category of funding, including our procurement methodologies when we go to market, and seeking to achieve as much local participation as we can. But we're certainly not wanting to lower the standards relative and the probity aspects of the checks and balances that we have in place, because it's still value for money. It's public money that we're spending. We're certainly wanting to make sure that we don't compromise in that space.
Diane?
It's always good to get local if we can, but not at the expense of council. So we do have to understand that we are a business and that we're just not here with a full pocket of money for people. If we can, and it's a good marketing tool too, I think, at the end of the year, if we can, somehow market the fact of how much local business we have put out there. You're obviously not going to do it on every project you do individually, but, if you can at the end of the year, sort of market it somehow on how much local business we have given. And procurement always seems to be a bit of a problem. Is that just because it's changing, or because we've got staff turnover that we've always got this problem with procurement? Is it?
But Chair, if I could, I think that's an example of where the current arrangement of the staff member that we had, Rebecca Howard, she was our property and procurement officer. And through conversations with Rebecca during the course of her sort of taking on that role, and when she left, there was no doubt that she felt, and I felt, that there was a high risk area. It was just too much for one role. And so we go back to the conversation about workforce and risk and so forth. And as a consequence of her leaving, I made the call that position needed to be split, and created effectively one additional role, which was procurement and property. Fortunately, Tara, who was in a completely different position in a special projects function, had the skill sets, experience, the qualifications to be parachuted into the space. And the work that we're seeing that she's doing now is sort of fast tracking us to sort of best practice. We're not quite there yet, but we're certainly filling a lot of gaps. And I think it's been a successful risk mitigation process to have created those two roles and now create the focus that we now have in the procurement space. So, yeah.
Peter? Oh,
Very.
can I get Paul, please? Sorry. Yep.
I just wondering, can I get a description of what the Development Central Contract Register is about? Is that about contractors having to, putting all their OH&S documents together, for example? Is that what that means? Oh, sorry, it's on page 10 of 22, the first one. Is that to do with?
Yes.
It's an in-house.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So what does that do? Does that gather all the information about the contractors?
Yes. So all the contracts, the type of contract, the principal contact person, the nature of the contract, the start and finish of the contract, the reporting requirements of the contract. So that's an example of an improvement in our procurement space, because prior to which, if we had a contract register, it wasn't updated, it wasn't the sort of robust as what it needs to be, and that's been a real focus for us.
Okay.
Plus, I think it was also something that was raised through the external audit. I remember on there, one of their points that we didn't have an up-to-date contracts register. So it looks like it's now been put into place, which is good.
Through the chair to Henry, going back to what was discussing at the Norma board about procurement, we want 3 quotes. What do we do if we don't get 3 quotes?
Well, similar to the conversation that we had at the board meeting, our procurement policy has some thresholds. So I think it's up to $50,000, you need to have 3 quotes. Up to $100,000, you go to open tender. We go to market, get 3 quotes. If we don't get responses, then it's a judgment call in terms of whether we need to go back to the market or whether we're happy with the response that we've received. And as members would be aware, that there has been a motion passed by council about having a workshop in terms of the procurement space. So we're sort of working on that as we speak. So yeah, that's our response to this.
Peter, you want?
Yeah, just very quickly, I just wanted to say I thought this was a very well-written report, clear, thoughtful, and well expressed report, which don't always see. Not too much jargon or anything like that. So I just think it's worth commending when you get one like this.
Excellent. Paul, one more?
I suppose it's in here somewhere, but a lot of, if we've got a register with all the contractors on it and we've got all their details, does that preclude some of the smaller contractors that don't have the time or the expertise to get all their risk, profile up and going? And so therefore, does that cause more costs to our council because somebody's doing all this other stuff and then have to provide it and update it and everything else? So someone can tick it off, basically.
Yeah, so the register is pertaining to contracts that we have in place and the companies that we've engaged. Relative to how do we make it easy for local businesses to participate on council and be on a panel effectively is exactly what we're working through at the moment and what we'll articulate in the report to council on the COVID response in terms of how do we get the electrician, the carpenter, the plumber who doesn't engage with council normally because either they find it too hard or they're just not interested. And invariably it's that barrier of, well, if you deal with council, it's too bureaucratic. And it's a balance in between risk managing how much information we need from a tradie to then be on a panel such that when there is a job that we can then send them an email or send them a text and say, look, you're pre-qualified. You don't need to fill out the forms 4 or 5 times, but you just give us a quote for the job. So we are trying to streamline that as much as we can to make it as easy as possible, but maintaining some robustness to the fact that, if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys, and we're trying to, balance that. proposition.
Yeah, from my observation, it looks like some of the smaller operators miss out because there's just too much trouble. And then also when businesses get contracts, they think, well, it's such a drama to work with council, we're just going to load it a bit to cover all this other stuff. So to me, that's some of the reason I think that the cost goes up because of all these compliance issues. That's what it looks like a bit.
Through the chair, well, as a government instrumentality, we have responsibilities in terms of standards, and that does come at a cost. Work health, safety, insurances and such like. So, we have some legal obligations because when we engage a third party to undertake the work, it's effectively as if council is taking the work. So, there is a bit of a premium to that, but we're trying to make sure that that's not too much of a hurdle that would then exclude businesses. Now, again, in this COVID environment, when we want to get money out to the market quickly, but we want to maintain a certain quality, we're trying to streamline that.
Just finally, I'm not saying to drop the standards, insurance, work health and safety, etc. I'm just my observations is that the bigger companies tend to have all that in place, and the smaller guys don't. So, and there's a cost, for that compliance. That's just what I see. Yep.
Paul, but can I say, I think what Henry's saying though, what you've got to explain to them is a one-off compliance cost, because once you're on the panel, you're in. So again, that's a commercial decision that they've got to make. Do they want to work and do work for council? Do a little bit of work up front, get on the panel, and then you're in.
In fact, they all small guys say no work for council, but compliance.
But maybe they think because they've got to do, maybe with the new process that Henry's talking about, communicate that far and wide to even the smaller players, and yeah, they might do it. Sorry, Di.
Another thing with a small business is, perhaps not in today's market, but previously, was them waiting for money. So then, I know we pay 30 days or something, don't we? But I don't think it used to be like that. I think people, and they think, oh, it's the government, they just hang on to their money and we don't get it. So I think that's a mindset you've got to get around as well, that, that they do get paid in 30 days. So.
Point. If anything, we do pay on time, and we certainly don't bank the money somewhere to accumulate interest. And from that perspective, I would think that most people would think it's a safe bet working with councils because you're going to get paid.
I think also one of your earlier comment about marketing, and the use of, I think the annual report will be a really good place to put that statistic every year, how much of your local people, I think it's, that's the story you tell every year of your last year. So it'll be a good place if you can gather that information. Okay, if no further questions on this item, then the committee notes the Business Improvement Update Report, and Henry, to pass on our thanks and commendment to Dara for this report. So someone to move, Di, seconded Peter, all in favour? Okay, carried. Okay, 6.4, I think Peter's going to vacate the room. Okay, over to you.
Yes, through the chair, as we've noted in the report, Peter's tenure with the committee as an independent member expires at the end of December this year. So we're just wanting to instigate that recruitment process, proposing that we do as part of good governance, do to the full recruitment process, of which Peter could, if he wants to, consider putting his hand up for reappointment. As we've noted in the report, Mr. Chairman, consistent with what we had done previously was we've deliberately got the term of the two independent members different, staggered, and also their terms expiring deliberately outside of the term of the council, so that there's that consistent sort of continuity for the committee. But happy to answer any questions.
No?
Does this sort of need to go out to tender, or can he just be reappointed?
Through the chair, my understanding is the council can elect to reappoint if it so decides. But that's ultimately a decision for council to make.
Karen?
I actually think it's good governance to go out. I think, and that's absolutely no disrespect to Peter, but I think it is good to test the market every now and again. So from a good governance point of view, I do think this is good practice. Oh, right. Sorry.
So is the committee happy then for the panel that's going to, so obviously Karen, myself and Paul to be the three people that will go through the process? Yep. Okay. Thanks, Paul. Seconded? Right? Yep. Okay. Okay. All in favour? Okay. Carried. Thank you. Yeah. So when you were looking at this, so November, end of November, isn't it? So will you want to do end of December? So will you do so?
Next meeting.
Yep. So when are we looking doing all the interviews, or when are you going to advertise? Will you do?
We'll most probably advertise in the next couple of weeks.
Oh, okay. So it'll be done before he finishes good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that it's just, yeah, so if it is Peter who can do it, then he just starts from January 1.
Yes.
Thank you, Peter. Okay. So 6.5 is the Audit Committee Annual Report 2019-20.
Through the chair, as part of the committee's terms of reference, this is an annual report we put up referencing the activities that the Audit Committee has undertaken for the previous financial year. As we've listed in the report itself and the attachment, the annual report, suffice to say, I think the committee has undertaken a considerable quantity of work over the financial year, and we've endeavoured to demonstrate, Mr. Chairman, the level of that work undertaken, and in terms of made comments about those activities and the outcomes that have emanated from that. But again, more than happy to have any questions from members.
Thanks. And I can see this getting a bit larger, this annual report, when we become an Audit and Risk Committee, isn't it? Yep. Okay. Thanks, Karen. Second.
Yeah,
Peter,
I'm happy to
all
move.
in favour?
Yeah.
Okay, carried. Thank you. And the last agenda item is our work plan that management updates for us after every meeting. Or tell us how we're tracking along.
Just a question, Chair. Work plan. I was looking at the work plan and I just wonder whether we need to add something about discussion on risk appetite, or is it there? Did I miss it? We've got risk management down there. Well, that's a policy review. But I think we need to incorporate in the next 12 months a discussion on risk appetite.
Or maybe that would, where is it?
Just trying to think where it might fit under.
Well, under internal controls and risk management systems, I think maybe up the top
Yes.
there. So we just put another thing in, yeah, maybe risk appetite and tolerance, because that would be something
Yeah.
that that once it's in place, you'd review it on an annual basis anyway.
Yeah.
So maybe just include that risk appetite statement. And I think coming back to Karen's earlier comment when we did the internal audit plan, that under external audit, that we also under internal audit have the same box there, in-camera review with auditors under the internal audit as well. And I think I mentioned while it will be good to have them here at the same time, if the internal auditor can't make it, maybe we can do the in-camera when they're presenting an internal audit report. We can do that in camera. It can be fitted together, all well and good. That'll be good. Being mindful that the external one's done when we do the financial statements. So any other updates on this plan? Someone to move and second that plan with the changes that's been recommended. Do you want to capture that? That's with the recommended changes. Okay. Someone who moved that, sorry. Di, seconded. And seconded Karen. All in favour? Okay, carried. Okay, we've got nil items for discussion. Obviously, we've got items for future discussions coming up. We know we're going to have the internal audit plan again. Questions without notice is nil. Motions without notice nil. Officially close the meeting at 8:37. So thank you everyone for your time tonight. Residual